Hello! This time, this video is going to be a little bit more simpler than my other videos. I just want to make one that goes into detail about what to look for when you're buying a typewriter. It's something of a question I sometimes get, and I would like to be able to show something rather than just explain something. So, this is a 1967 Olympia SM9. I got it recently and I haven't actually taken it out of the crate since I bought it. I did do a proper test of it before I bought it, of course, but it hasn't been touched since, other than that I just took a cloth and wiped down the surface. Because of that, I thought this would be a good machine to do a run-through of what I would normally test before I buy a typewriter. So, the first things we always want to test is the escapement. The escapement is the mechanism that is placed underneath the carriage with a cog wheel, and its job is to make sure that this typewriter, every time you press a key, it jumps one spot ahead. We would normally test this basically at first with spacebar, because we have two mechanisms that trigger the escapement: keys and spacebar. Another option is the backspace, but the backspace doesn't always trigger the escapement. Sometimes it just pulls on the carriage. We can quickly notice here that pressing the spacebar on this does nothing, and that leads us to the first thing that we have to check and make sure is fine, because I actually get some machines that people want me to fix where the only problem is that the carriage lock is engaged. The carriage lock on the SM9 and Olympias is located right to the top left corner of the keyboard. That is not the case for every typewriter. Some have key locks, like Olivetti's will usually have a little lever on the flip on the side right below the carriage. Other machines may have a carriage lock on the underside of the left side, or the underside of the right side. Old Ericus even have a lock that is... No, sorry, not Ericus. Old Remington noiseless portables, for example. Their carriage lock is the knob, which you just pull out. Another thing that I actually forgot, and that is very important, is to test that the carriage is actually secure, that it actually doesn't wobble. Some carriages will wobble just a little bit, and a little bit is fine. But if there is a lot of wobble on this, then there is a problem, and it will be hard to fix that problem. So I would never actually buy a machine like that, because I can't be asked to fix a problem like that. That is hard. This is super locked in. There's no wobble whatsoever. That is a rare quality, and that speaks mountains to this machine. So that's a good thing. I've seen machines. Later, Olivetti's tend to struggle a little bit with this, where the carriage will be not secure at all and will wobble around, and that can actually also be bad enough that it impacts typing quality. The type slugs just don't hit the paper at the right, or the Platen at the right angle because of that wobble, and it ruins typing experience. So, we have now confirmed that spacebar does indeed forward the carriage. So, escapement works at least for spacebar. Now, spacebar often triggers the escapement through its own mechanism. Key levers trigger the escapement via another set of mechanisms. Sometimes they're unconnected, sometimes not. So just because spacebar works doesn't necessarily mean the keys will work. And then that brings us to the first thing that you as a buyer need to remember to do before you actually go out to a seller. Bring a piece of paper. Bringing a piece of paper is important for two reasons. Actually, three reasons. The first reason: you don't want to type on a typewriter that doesn't have paper so that you type straight onto the Platen. And for that there are two reasons. The first one is, if you type straight onto the Platen, you will leave ink imprints of whatever you're typing on the Platen. It will dirt the Platen. Why would you want a dirty Platen? The second is, as time passes, the rubber on these machines, particularly the older ones, they will go hard. And hard enough that the action of typing actually will impact the rubber, and it may actually make the rubber chip. On really old machines, I've seen in antique stores where people don't know what they're doing and they're playing around with antique machines. I sometimes see letters engraved into the rubber of the Platen because they've chipped it. So use a piece of paper because it will shield the Platen from impact, and you won't dirty up your Platen. The third reason why you'd bring a piece of paper is because some of these has a problem, some typewriters in general have a problem, where the rubber loses its grip on paper. If it doesn't manage to make a grip on paper, it won't forward the paper into the mechanism. This is usually caused by one or two things. One of the things is that the Platen has gotten a layer of fat that have hardened. The whole surface is slippery. And if the surface is slippery, it won't grip the paper. This is often usually fixed just by cleaning it, maybe with a hard scrub. It doesn't really take much. So the other thing that can happen is that underneath the Platen, there are these rolls, these rubber rolls that we use. We call them paper feed rollers. These are supposed to be completely round, obviously, and the rubber also should have some grip to it. Sometimes the rubber used in these rollers are of poorer quality than the main Platen, and the end result is that the rubber of these actually sort of sink down, and because there's a force that pushes it up to the Platen, it actually sinks down to form almost like a punctured tire. And if it's not round, then paper is not going to go past it. It'll just slide and be locked in. So if those have sunk, paper will not go through the Platen, and that's why you bring a piece of paper, because you want to test that paper goes through the mechanism. Okay, so we've gone off track now for a long time. We want to see, does this machine type, and when we type, do the carriage move forward? And the answer is yes. And it would have done so better than if I didn't accidentally press two keys at one time. So we see that pressing keys, check, does move the carriage forward. So the second thing we want to test is the integrity of the escapement. Because the escapement is, as I said, a cogwheel with teeth sticking out on all sides. If one of those teeth breaks off, then there is one particular spot repeatedly throughout the carriage motion that will skip. The wheel will make a 360-degree rotation for maybe every third or fourth, but the point is that a full span of the entire motion, the entire carriage, is often more than just one or two or even three full rotations of the escapement wheel. So what we do then is that we have to, at least for half the carriage, try to make a full run through of the entire motion to see that whenever we press the spacebar or keys, for this you can use whatever, but we want to test that it doesn't suddenly skip 2 jumps ahead, or 3 or 4. So through that entire motion, every time we press spacebar, it only moved 1 step ahead. So we can reasonably assume that the escapement wheel on this is intact and fine. The next thing we need to make sure is that all of them are working. So for that you go through and you use every single key at least once. Everything works. Perfect. The next thing we want to test, well, actually, I want to get into, some of you who watch this movie may have already noticed that there is one problem with this machine. Most modern typewriters have something called a silent return spring. And what that does is that whenever you push the carriage back, that spring makes sure that a pivot, like a pawl or a dog as we call it, that usually engages with the escapement is pushed to the side so that the teeth on the escapement doesn't rub against it. That thing on this machine is either gummed up or missing. Because when you pull this carriage back, you hear like this vibrating, grinding kind of sound. If I press down the carriage release, you don't hear it. So again, return. So that's a problem. It's not a deal breaker. It doesn't necessarily grind in a way that will damage the machine, at least not soon. But it's not great, so that's something I want to fix. I'm gonna have to look into that. The next thing then is we have now tested all these keys. We can also have a test on the backspace here, but to just see that, yep, it does indeed go back one step for each time you're pressing it, so that's fine. You also want to make sure that the shift keys are doing what they should, and not just doing what they should, but also aligned as they should. So pressing an H and then a large capital H, small, large, small, large, small, large, etc. And now looking at this text, it's probably not as visible, and don't want to mess around with the camera right now, but the idea is that you want to make sure that both the large and small letters are printed exactly on the same height, so they're in line. Sometimes they get beat out of whack and they won't be. That's a fixable problem, but it's something to be aware of when you buy your typewriter. If you are not mechanically inclined and you don't want to be, that's something you should test. If you want a machine that you don't have to either send to a repairman or fix yourself, that's something you need to test so that you can make sure that the typewriter will be what you need it to be. The next thing we want to make sure is that the ribbon is correctly forwarding. So the best way and the most easy way to just test that the ribbon is forwarding is to have eyes on the ribbons and start pressing. Now we see here that the spool is being pulled around and both are in fact moving. So we know that one of them is pulling and one of them is releasing or yielding. The one that is doing the pulling, when you manually pull that around, you'll hear cogs sort of going around. So that's good. The second thing you want to make sure is that the ribbon forwarding mechanism can in fact reverse by itself. And what we mean by that is that when one spool has gone empty and the other is full, the machine should, in most cases, reverse the mechanism itself. And to test this, we pull all the ribbon over to one side of the spools. So we carefully just go all the way until it says stop. This one is now empty, this is full. As I continue typing now, you'll notice, if you can actually see it, maybe you can't, but there are two sets of fingers that the ribbon goes through. As the ribbon tightens and gets tighter and tighter as this side continues to pull, the mechanism that the ribbon goes through will be pulled down. And when it reaches a certain point, that will trigger a reverse mechanism that will start making this side yield and this side pull, effectively reversing the mechanism. So let's try that. We start and we notice now that something is happening. It's moving. Snap. Now it's reversed. And you see this starts moving instead. So now the ribbon is moving in the opposite direction. So ribbon reversal is working. Take note how a machine reverses its ribbon depends from machine to machine. Some are dependent, some have the same fingers that Olympia has, but Olympus will trigger regardless of whether or not the ribbon has so-called eyelets or not. Some machines I've gotten are dependent on eyelets, but has ribbons installed that do not have eyelets. Basically, probably because someone bought ribbons and it was the only ribbon available to them. So take note that if the ribbon forwarding doesn't reverse because it doesn't seem to generate enough tension, it might be because the wrong type of ribbon is installed, or not wrong type of ribbon, but at least the ribbon lacks a feature. To test that, you can also, of course, you try to trigger the mechanism manually by yourself to see that it actually does pull both ways. But again, just like with the caps alignment, that might not be something you want to try to fix yourself if there is a problem with the reverse mechanism. If it's just the ribbon, yeah, you can buy that. You can get ribbons, just get a new ribbon with eyelets. Okay, next we want to make sure that the return arm is actually doing what it's supposed to do. This is the return arm. Most machines there's just an arm. On some older models there's this thumb thing that you push up with your thumb to return the mechanism, but that's an old mechanism. It's quite simple. You make sure that the line forwarding is set to 1 and you just use it. For every time that you pull this to the side, you should have 1 row forwarded. You can then also test the line forwarding lever. On some machines this is located on top behind, some it's in front, but most of them will have some sort of sign indicating that this will change the line forwarding. So now I've set it to 1.5, so that's 1, 2, 3 rows, because 2 clicks is 1 row. So that's, we have it to 1, 1, 2, set it to 1.5, 1, 2, 3, set it to double row, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that works fine. It's not as commonly used, but most machines also have this option where you pull it even further back. And you'll now hear that there is no ratcheting or clicking that's happening when you're rolling the Platen. And that is because if you were in the old days and you got a form that you were supposed to fill out where you're supposed to write in something on a dotted line, using this you could finely tune wherever that dotted line was and then make sure that you could type straight on that instead of having to try to navigate the paper at the right position in accordance with the ratcheting. We're moving into margins. So margins are located almost always right on top of the carriage with these pins. On Olympia, these pins are pinched together and moved sideways. On most models, there's this little key or a button which you push down, and while pushing down, sliding it to the sides to where you want it. Margins control where the edges of the paper are. It implies or tells the machine where that is, and it also controls when the bell triggers. So when we start moving to the side, and we've set the margin to this edge, it should give us a ding. So the ding works, and a bell is important. I don't have to tell you that, you know that. The margin also has a margin release, so when you reach the end of the margin, it locks in, and it won't go any further. It will also stop you from actually being able to type. So it's a full unlock. That key will not move until you press the margin release. You noticed how the carriage made a slight little jump. We can now move on, and if I were to press down harder, you see the slug is about to hit the Platen, so that would also work. So margins work and margin release works. But we have here the color selector, so we have black, we have stencil mode. Now stencil will make sure the ribbon forwarding doesn't move at all. Or sorry, the ribbon forwarding will actually move, but the ribbon vibrator won't move. Ribbon vibrator is the little device in the middle that holds the ribbon in place and lifts and lowers. So when this is set to blank or stencil, it won't rise, meaning you can notice how we get no prints. Red will obviously type red, or whatever other color you have underneath on the bottom side of your ribbon. And this is also one of the main reasons why some machines, or many people, would prefer to use all black ribbon. When you've typed through this ribbon and it has moved from side to side several times, you end up spending all the ink. The ink will be gone. When that happens, you need to change the ribbon, obviously. But if you had a full black ribbon, you could just flip this down back to red setting, because that would start typing on the lower section, meaning you would have a whole new ribbon on the ribbon itself for typing. Some machines, like the Hermes 3000 or the Olympia SG1, to name a few, they also have a fourth option that is usually marked yellow, which will make sure that slugs hit the ribbon dead in the middle of the ribbon, meaning that, like with this, you only have 100% of the ribbon. If this was a full black, you could have 200%, and if you had a machine that supported it, you could have 300% more ink from your ribbon. So that would be super efficient. So we have noticed that color selection does work. We saw that stencil mode worked. We saw that we could type red, we could type black. So the only thing I would then make sure to have a look at is I would still open the lid. I would inspect, is there rust in the segment? Is there rust underneath in any place? Can I see whether or not there's oxidation? Rust is obviously brown, but oxidation will be white. Oxidation isn't as harmful, but it's something that you want to look for, because oxidation, white oxidation, is something that you often need to have removed because it can get sticky. It can make your machinery not operate. Some machines also have a tabulator, like this one does. Now, tabulators are basically preset points at which the carriage can forward to. So say we forward this to the line where it says 50 on the scale. This has a sort of dynamic tab setting system with the plus and the minus on the keyboard. So if I now press plus while at 50, I will have created a tab point at 50. So moving back now and pressing tab, you can notice how the carriage moved straight to 50 and stopped there. If I press minus at this point, that point will have been deleted. So pressing tab now, I'll go straight past it. There's also a lever on the back here. If I pull this down, I will effectively remove all tab points. And that can be tested by saying, okay, let's create tab, go 5 steps ahead, and just create a bunch of them. Go back, and we now see that by repeatedly pressing tab, we have many different stops. If we pull down this and now press tab, we go through the entire row and there is no tabulator point anymore. Finally, this machine also has a paper rest arm, which is lifted by pressing this little key. That works fine, that's excellent. Not many machines have a spring-loaded paper rest. Many you just reach back and you pull it up yourself. A paper rest is not something a machine has to have. It's nice to have, but you don't need it. Finally, at the very end, you may want to just lift up and have a look underneath the machine. You want to have a look at just, is there white oxidation? Is there rust? Is there dust? Any dirt? This machine is slightly dusty. It needs to be vacuumed. So yeah, now I hope that you are ready to go out there and find your next typewriter. The typewriter that will make you happy. And that you will be feeling more confident in what to look for and what to make sure that your typewriter has before you buy it, so that you avoid the whole problem of buying something that doesn't work, because we all hate that, don't we? So, I thank you for watching, and from both me and my cats, I thank you so much for your time and hope you enjoyed watching this. So, thank you and goodbye.